Hey guys, so today I'm going to talk to you real fast about federalism. Okay, what is it? Why is it important? Federalism originally was just supposed to be the way that the federal and the state government had their powers separated. It was pretty cut and dry. In the beginning, it was something called dual federalism, and under that platform, never the two shall meet. Okay, but over the years, things have changed. Federalism is laid out in the Constitution through Articles 1, 4, and 6, and also throughout the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. Now, Article 1 already starts laying out some powers that are only for the federal government, such as the powers of the legislative branch, the power to print money, to make laws, declare war, to control interstate commerce. There's lots of things that are strictly powers controlled by Congress. Right? This is laid out in Section 1, Clause 8. The biggest one here is the Commerce Clause. And the Commerce Clause would regulate commerce with foreign nations, with interstate commerce, and with commerce amongst Native American tribes. It's been tested a few times over the years, all the way back in 1824 in a case called Gibson v. Ogden. That case was over steamboats and who got to have a monopoly. There were two different men. One of them had a license to run his steamboat between Jersey and New York by the federal government. The other one had one issued by the state government. Now the federal government license won out. If you want to know more into that, it's kind of an interesting story. You need to look into it. Um, but this starts out with a few other things. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, the necessary and proper clause to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by the Constitution and in the government of the United States, or in any department or office thereof. So, essentially, this one says that the federal government has the ability, or at least Congress, to do anything that they deem necessary and proper to fulfill any of their other duties. So, for example, chartering banks. In a case called McCulloch v. Maryland in 1816, it was brought between the Supreme Court because the second Bank of the United States refused to pay taxes to the state of Maryland. Once they had gone in, the state of Maryland wanted to tax the bank. They didn't really like the fact that they were stepping on the bank's toes that were already inside the state. So they went and tried to collect taxes. Whenever the bank refused to pay, eventually it made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, where it was thrown out. And in that, they made two separate rulings. They made one ruling stating that states do not have the right to tax the federal government, and another ruling stating that taxation is the power to destroy. Now, with that being said, anytime someone says that taxes won't destroy a business, they literally can. It's why we can't tax the federal government and they can tax us. So, Article 4, Section 1, this is where we're going to find the full faith and credit clause. The full faith and credit clause shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. This clause requires each state to recognize and honor the laws, public records, and judicial decisions of every other state. So, this is one of the reasons that things happen, like same sex marriage being legal throughout the entire country. This is why when you drive across to Louisiana or Oklahoma, you don't have to get a new driver's license. And the thing with marriage is it's been evolving over time. It started with Loving v. Virginia. That was all the way back in 1967 over interracial marriage. Richard Loving and his wife, Mildred Jeter Loving, he was a white man, she was a black woman. They got married in Washington, D.C., but on returning to Virginia, they were arrested to be sentenced to 1 year in prison. Now, that eventually would get thrown out, and you could get married to anyone you wanted, regardless of race at that point, although it did cause a lot of issues that we would deal with all the way through civil rights. And then we have Arbogefel v. Hodges. This one's quite a bit newer. This one uses the 14th Amendment, and it guarantees of due process and equal protections under the law, requires states to recognize and permit same-sex marriages throughout the country. That one's a lot newer. Now, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1, Privileges and Immunities Clause. The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in several states. The clause ensures that citizens of each state are treated equally and fairly in all states. It prevents states from discriminating against citizens of other states in favor of their own residents. So, You have freedom of movement inside the United States. Anywhere that you go, you will be treated equally under the law. That's not to say that you'll be treated equally by the people that live there, but legally, uh, nothing can be done to you that way. So if you want to buy a home somewhere, no one can stop you from doing that, things like that. Now, um, Article 4, Section 2 actually has something called the extradition clause. Now, this means simply that you can't commit a crime and run to another state and get away from it. If you committed a crime and flee the state and they find you, you'll be extradited back to your state uh, for judgment. Now, there are people that would try and flee the country, but depending on which country you go to, you could also be extradited back to the United States. I spent a lot of time in South America. Brazil will extradite you back to the United States for crimes committed as long as the death penalty is not on the table. If the death penalty is on the table, they won't extradite you back. So there's some countries that have clauses like that, others that will send you back to the United States regardless. So even fleeing the country through this extradition clause, there is still a chance that you'll end up back here. Section 3, the admissions of new states and property clause. So for any new state to make it into the country, it has to be voted on by Congress and by the people that live in those places. Without that, uh, you can't become a state. I know there's the idea that Texas can split up and become 5 separate states. Now, while that's technically true, the only way that that could happen is if Congress and the citizens of Texas both okayed that arrangement, which is pretty unlikely because it would guarantee Texas 10 seats in the Senate as opposed to uh, two, and it could potentially also change the number of House reps uh, that we have here in the state. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is Clause 2 from that same article, and this is the Supremacy Clause. Now, pretty cut and dry. It states that federal law is supreme over state law. So if a state law and a federal law don't mesh, that the federal law takes precedent and is the one that should be followed. Now, there's a few places where this isn't the case. If you look at marijuana, marijuana in the state of Texas is kind of taking a step backwards right now. But overall, throughout the country, marijuana has been overwhelmingly legalized in almost every single state in one way or the other. Now, federal law still states that cannabis is illegal and that it can't be sold. But here we are. It's one of the few places where the states have kind of been fighting back. And eventually, I think maybe the federal government will end up legalizing it. But for right now, it's a point where the states are doing something that is against the federal government. One of the very few things that's happening right now across the country. Which takes us to the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Now, this means that if it's not stated as a federal law, then it can be uh, construed as being state law, controlled by the states. Federal government doesn't get a say in it. There are times that the federal government has tried to overstep those bounds. In a case, New York versus the United States, the federal government tried to force the state of New York to build places so that they could use it for toxic waste, so they could dump nuclear material there. Say if New York fought back against this in a 6-3 decision by the Supreme Court, it found that the federal government did not have the authority to force a state to do anything like that. Now, all of this was under dual federalism. Remember where the two don't mix. But something happened early on in the 19th century, in the 1900s, um, and that was right around the time of FDR, the Great Depression, and World War II all coming to a head, and that was called the New Deal. Now, the New Deal was a series of programs, public works projects, financial reforms, and regulations. It was enacted between 1933 and 1938 to rescue the U.S. from the Great Depression, to give us a way out. And what that did was it changed the way that we look at federalism in the country as a whole from the original form to something called cooperative federalism. Now, cooperative federalism gives the federal government a lot more leeway on how they can play a bigger part in state affairs. Now, one of the ways that they do this, and probably the most prominent, is through granting aid, right? They do this through grants and mandates for the most part. Now, there's two different kinds of grants that are still being given. There used to be a few more, but categorical grants. Categorical grants spell out exactly how you're going to use the money. They may say, here's $100 million. You need to use this to fix your elementary schools, period. Now, another grant, block grants. Block grants have a lot more of a broad spectrum of how they can be spent. So they might say, here's $100 million. Use it on bettering education. Now, whether that's the schools paying teachers more, uh, redoing a football stadium, which is something that happens way more in East Texas than I think probably a lot of citizens like. Uh, Even redoing roads or putting new signage out that may help make the area around the school safer for children coming and going. It's got a lot more leeway with block grants. States love block grants. Block grants let them get things done that they feel like they need to get done. The categorical grants, those are the ones that Congress loves. Okay, Congress likes a categorical grant because it gives them control over how that money is being spent. Now, the last kind of thing that we do here is called mandates. Mandates don't always come with money. So sometimes even a good mandate may actually be looked upon negatively, like the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, that force all federal and state government buildings to be wheelchair accessible, have elevators, all that kind of stuff. Now, I don't think anybody looks at that and says that's a bad thing. We shouldn't be doing that. What people didn't like was that we had to do all of that without any kind of federal funds to help us through it. And because of that, people tried to fight against it. Now that it's here, it's a pretty good little thing for us. Now, mandates have been used in the past as a way to blackmail states. Once people get used to that money, once they get used to things coming in, it's hard to take it back away from them. So, how did they do that? One of the biggest ones they did was something called the National Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984. All right. So, how this works is prior to 1984, the drinking age throughout the majority of the country was 18 years old. But they decided that at the federal level that they wanted that to become 21. That was under the Reagan administration. And the way that they did that is they told the states that you will change your drinking age to 21, or we're going to withhold a large portion of your federal road funding to your states. If you've driven around some of the roads, once you get off the main roads, you may think that we didn't get the road funding, uh, but we did. Every single state ended up going along with this by the end of it. And it was, like I said, it's kind of a form of blackmail, even though they don't really want to call it that. Now, there's something else that passed recently in 2019 that may seem like it was the same thing, but it was done using a different power of the legislature. It was actually used using the Commerce Clause, and that is Tobacco 21. The Tobacco 21 Act changed the smoking age from 18 to 21, but it didn't come through a mandate, and states didn't change the law. What happened was in the spending bill of 2019, a provision was put in to change the smoking age to 21. In that provision, the legislature made the claim that because tobacco is shipped across state lines, then it is subject to the Commerce Clause. With it being subject to the Commerce Clause, that means they have all the authority to control it. Now, the issue that comes with that, for me, is that almost every single good in the states goes across state lines. There's very rarely something that is made and stays 100% in the place that it was made and doesn't go anywhere else. So allowing them to use the Commerce Clause to make this change means that they could use this clause to make a change for really whatever else they wanted, which can become an issue in the future if that's not looked at. And hopefully in the future, no, I'm not saying I want people smoking at 18, if this ever finds it to the Supreme Court, that they will have the common sense to overturn it, because using that as a reach and could potentially, while maybe not that specific act, lead to oversteps of power. So, what are the advantages of our system? Well, first off, there's no overlap in policy that won't affect other states. Power becomes easier to change the closer you get to your local levels, and states maintain a large amount of control. Uh, and there's reasons for this. We have tornadoes in Texas, okay, but they don't in Idaho, right? We don't need people from Idaho telling us how to handle a tornado any more than they need us telling them how to handle severe snow weather. Now, we may could actually use we could maybe actually use them telling us a little bit about how to deal with the snow, because the last couple times that we've had a lot of it down here, it hasn't really gone very well for us. Our grid doesn't really hold up to it the ways that theirs does. So it maybe would be nice to have a little bit of input on what we do with severe winter weather. But overall, reaching across state lines and telling each other what we're supposed to be doing doesn't work. Our states aren't the same, the people aren't the same, and the problems that we have in each state aren't the same. The United States is an absolutely huge country, and because of that, culture, even some of our language, and our issues are all going to change across state lines. So being able to deal with those things on a state level as opposed to having to go through the federal is really the better way for that to work. Now, the disadvantages of this uh, are that when we do need to change a policy at a national level, it's limited in their ability to actually do those things. Things like education, medical changes, uh, they change drastically across state lines. Those are things where we could probably use a little bit more oversight on, to make sure that everybody is doing things the same. Education's a big one; it comes up a lot. They worry that we're lower in our scores than we have been in the past. We're lower than a lot of other countries. But one of the reasons for that is because our education system isn't equal across states. Education in one state may be amazing, while in another state, most of the people graduating aren't completely literate. And that's an issue that we're seeing all over the United States right now. Now, there have been times that states have used their autonomy to do things that are a little shady. In 1965, the Voters' Rights Act was passed. Not too long ago, in Shelby County, Shelby County, Alabama, tried to challenge the Voters' Rights Act. They wanted to get rid of it. Now, they actually ended up getting rid of some of the provisions. That's why they can do photo ID now for you to be able to vote. Prior to that, that wasn't even anything they could ask for. Then we have Gonzalez v. Reich in 2005, and this was over the Compassionate Use Act of legalized medical marijuana. Marijuana was legalized all the way back in 1996 for medical use in California, maybe a little bit earlier than that, but I believe that was the right date. Uh, and the federal government kind of had this Ponzi scheme where they would come into a dispensary, take the money, take the products, but not arrest anybody. In the case of Gonzalez, he sued, but unfortunately for him, his suit didn't go anywhere. Now, there's been conflicts between states and the federal government, not just over the legalization of marijuana, uh, but that is, like I said, one of the biggest ones, to the extent that there's only two states in the entire country, Idaho and Nebraska, that don't have some type of marijuana legalization on their books. Now, Texas has a medical use program, and they have had uh, the cannabis, hemp, right? So the THC derived things from hemp. SB3 that just went through may or may not make that thing of a pass by September. It really all comes down to whether or not the governor vetoes it, and whether or not one of these lawsuits goes through and is able to stop that from taking place, because it's going to kill a lot of businesses. Now, SB 1070 that comes out of Arizona, that's about immigration enforcement. The state of Arizona had put laws in that allowed them to stop and frisk people and ask for papers just off of suspect that they might be here illegally. The Supreme Court threw that out and said that they were able to check if a person was here legally, but only if they were caught while in the act of another crime, so traffic violations or anything else like that. But they were no longer able to just throw people out. just because. And then, of course, the big one, Roe v. Wade. So 1973, the Supreme Court says that Roe v. Wade uh, is constitutional, that a woman has a right to choose whether or not she's going to have a baby or not. And that sat on the books for a long time. It was even tried a few times to throw it out. In 1992, Planned Parenthood v. Casey. But then in 2022, Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization, the Supreme Court did a turn face, and they voted against a woman's right to an abortion based off of the 14th Amendment and took that away. They sent that back to the states, where the states make the decisions, which is why you have some states where it's completely legal, and you have other states like Texas that will try and process you for getting an abortion, even if you go to a different state to have it done where it's still legal and easier to get access to. Now, regardless of what you feel on this change, the fact that the Supreme Court can change their mind is a good thing. And I say that because um, if we look at things like Brown v. the Board of Education, Brown v. the Board of Education, the Supreme Court stated that separate but equal was not a lawful ruling, and they kicked it out. Prior to that, there had been a vote on something called Plessy v. Ferguson. In Plessy v. Ferguson, they found that separate but equal was perfectly constitutional. So while times change, people change, justices change, sometimes their decisions are going to change as well. Sometimes will change for things that we agree with, sometimes they won't. It's the way that the system is set up. But that is federalism in a nutshell. For more, make sure you read your textbook, read the chapter over this, and get your stuff done. And I will see you guys next week.